Welcome. It is Wednesday, and if it's Wednesday at 12 o'clock, it's PR Tech Wednesday. I am
Except it's
joined.
not.
Go ahead.
Except it's not three. It's not 12 o'clock for me, but that's cool.
Well, it is. It is in the entertainment capital of the world.
Okay, that works.
So my guest today is David Meerman Scott. He is an internationally acclaimed business strategist, entrepreneur, advisor to emerging companies, and a public speaker. We met at South by Southwest nearly 10 years ago.
Oh my gosh, dude,
Um,
that's
his new
that
book,
long.
Fanocracy, that he wrote with his daughter Reiko, came out last week. He is a Wall Street Journal best-selling author of 10 previous books, including The New Rules of Marketing and PR, now in its 6th edition and available in 29 languages. Marketing Lessons from the Grateful Dead, which he wrote with the CEO of HubSpot, and New Rules of Sales and Service. And in his spare time, he surfs and travels around the world for great live music. Happy New Year. How are you?
I'm doing great. Has it been 10 years? Oh my God, it makes me feel so
Almost.
old. It makes me feel
Almost.
old. Yeah. But yes, Happy New Year. I'm doing wonderful.
How was your holiday?
Um, on one hand, relaxing because we didn't have to travel very far, but on the other hand, frantic because the new book came out on January 7th. And so it was motoring to get up to that release date, but awesome in many, many, many ways. And you?
I ate a little too much. I gained a little weight, and so I am switching to a diet of cool mountain water.
I have the exact same thing, but it's in a Grateful Dead themed mug rather than a glass.
I was doing really good. I was at spin class yesterday, and I was like my third spin class, and I envisioned myself in a headband. And I was thinking about the book. I was thinking, I'm going to be a spinning fan. I'm going to get a T-shirt. This is going to be me.
Uh-huh.
And then I twisted my ankle.
Oh no.
So all bets are off. But I'm going to go back on Friday if my wife will let me. We'll see. So now 13 years ago, you really did write the foundation book on how technology would change PR. You really tapped into a nerve at the time. What was it that compelled you to write that book?
So I was really lucky that a few things happened in my career leading up to the time I wrote The New Rules of Marketing and PR. The first thing that happened was I was a marketing and public relations person. I was the head of corporate communications for a couple of different publicly traded companies. And it was actually in the real-time news business. So I worked for companies that eventually became acquired by companies like Dow Jones and Reuters. So I was actually able to understand how real-time news and real-time data is used prior to the web. So I feel like I had a head start on the web because I understood how information worked before what I thought was anybody else. So then 1995 comes around, Netscape goes public, which was sort of my line in the sand for when we all could have access to the web. And it was slow to get started in the 90s, but then by the early 2000s, PR people really recognized that this is something we need to pay attention to. But I had already had 20 years of understanding of how this data worked, how real-time news works, and so on. And so I started to do things in my corporate role, like put out press releases using the press release distribution services, not to reach the media, but to get Google results. Actually, I think at that point it was just Yahoo, but to get search engine results. And then the second great thing that happened was in 2002, I was fired. And so what that allowed me to do is recognize that I can go out on my own. And initially, I was consulting in PR and marketing. But then I realized that I've got a bit of knowledge that I need to get out into the world. So in 2004, I think it was 2004 or 2005, I can't remember. I wrote an ebook called The New Rules of PR. And it was really about how you can use press releases and I made it completely free, no registration required. And it was about how anybody can use press releases as a way to get search engine optimization and reach people directly, bypassing the news media completely. And that thing had 50,000 downloads the first month. And within 6 months had 1 million downloads. And I was like, wow, I hit a nerve with the PR community on this one. And that's what allowed me to get a deal with Wiley to do the print book that became The New Rules of Marketing and PR, which originally came out in June of 2007. So on one hand, I'm lucky because I was able to see things early, but on the other hand, you know, I recognized I had that knowledge, and I realized that I had to get it out there. I had to get it out there because it's so important for the marketing and public relations community to have access to what I thought was the new way of doing things.
Yeah, I remember it being such an exciting time.
Yeah.
You know, in those years, I was leading a 2-day workshop for PRSA called the Social Media Boot Camp.
I remember that one, yeah.
And I remember students would constantly come in and talk about your book.
Right.
And, you know, it was an exciting time because we were so optimistic.
Yeah.
Really, all of us were, about the ability of, you know, we're going to talk about what a fanocracy is, but I mean, we at the time we were talking about sort of the democratization of information, you know, before the gatekeepers, the big, you know, media companies controlled the airways, and
Yes.
if you wanted to go one to many, you had to go through them.
Yes.
But now you could go to the internet, you could
Yes.
go one yourself. And we talked about, you know, social antibodies and self-policing, and the idea that, you know, misinformation would be drowned out by
Yeah.
goodwill.
Yeah.
And you know, looking back at where we are today, you know, we're sort of in this post-truth age.
Yeah.
Where there's just too much information out there to make decisions based on facts, right?
Yeah.
Because it's tough to discern fact from fiction because there's so much information. Who has the time when you're trying to make a living? And, you know, that wasn't a popular conclusion at the time. At the time, we were all...
I don't think we could have seen what was coming. At least I didn't see what was coming back in 2007, 2008. You know, what I was seeing in 2007, 2008 is the same thing you just described. And it was this sort of the birth of social media, because before that, it was a lot of it was about blogging. And you remember we were all talking about blogging, and I was talking a lot about press releases as a way to reach people, but not the media, but send a press release through the old PR web service.
Sure.
And then that would appear on the search engines, and it was magic, and it was amazing. Yep. And it was like, holy cow, I can reach people directly. I can blog and reach people directly. And then Twitter was, I believe, 2007. And Facebook opened up to non-students in, I believe that was also 2007. And so those tools were so new and so interesting. And, you know, people like you and I gravitated to them. And it was, yeah, you know, I call it like rainbows and unicorns, and everyone's going to love one another, and we're all going to live in the Haight-Ashbury and have a love fest. And for a while, that's what it was.
Yeah. Well, so now that we're in this post-truth age, and I read a report that Annenberg put out, which said that, you know, not only are people not going to be able to tell the difference between information from a media outlet and an influencer and a company in the future, but they're really not even going to care where it comes from. What does all this mean for the field of public relations?
Yeah, it's a challenge, isn't it? So what I see happening, and I, you know, sort of first started to really do some deep thought around this about maybe 5 years ago. What I see happening is that pendulum has swung way too far into superficial online communications. And some of the signs and some of the things that are going on, you know, we all recognize are people are abusing the channel. You described the sort of post-truth and, anything goes. I think a major part of the problem is the social networks themselves, especially Facebook, that are optimized not to get their people's content to other people, but optimized for profit. Remember back in the day when you would send a social post, whether it was Facebook or whatever it was, it reached your timeline. But now, unless you pay people, the social networks, unless you pay, it really doesn't reach the audiences that you intend in the way that it used to. And so I think the social networks are partly to blame. What is the solution? I don't know what the solution is for that aspect, for the social aspect, for the what is truth aspect. But I'm 100% convinced that pendulum swinging too far in the direction of superficial online communications is swinging back to a true human connection. I'm absolutely convinced of that. As the online channel has all of the problems that we've talked about for the last 10 minutes, I think that the more we can show our humanity, the more we as a brand, or we as individuals, or we as public relations professionals can show that that we're actual human beings at this company that we work for, or we ourselves, that here are the people. Let me show them to you. Let me give you an opportunity to hear them and see them. And perhaps even in person, or certainly in the form of video and other things. And the sort of hiding behind the screen, and simply relying on those networks, I'm not sure that's going to work anymore.
So you wrote in the book, quote, "We've gone too far into manufactured friendships through social media, and something different is coming. The pendulum is swinging back to genuine, authentic communications." Can you give us some examples of this?
Yeah, I think it is actually people connecting with people. So what we did when I wrote this book with my daughter Reiko, as you know, and what we did was we looked at how and why does someone become a fan of something. And we actually looked at the neuroscience behind how and why somebody becomes a fan of something. So I'm a massive live music fan. I've seen 790 live music shows. I've got a spreadsheet where I keep a list. I started the spreadsheet by looking at my old ticket stubs and putting them into Excel. And then I've added, over the last roughly 20 years, adding them back into the Excel spreadsheet as I go to a show, including 75 Grateful Dead concerts. And my daughter Reiko is really, really into Harry Potter. She's read every book multiple times, seen every movie multiple times, gone to the Wizarding World of Harry Potter theme park in Orlando several times, go to UK for the studio tour. And she wrote an 85,000 word alternative ending to the Harry Potter series, a novel where Draco Malfoy is a spy for the Order of the Phoenix, and put that out on a fan fiction site. And it's been downloaded thousands of times and commented on hundreds of times. So she's a Harry Potter geek. I'm a live music geek. And what we realized is that, yes, I like the music. Yes, she likes Harry Potter. But what it's really about is being a part of a tribe. It's being a part of a tribe of like-minded people. It's being in a group where you can turn to somebody and speak the same language. Reiko can go up to any Harry Potter fan who she knows and say, "What house are you in?" And immediately know what that means and respond to it. I can go up to any Grateful Dead fan at a show, even if I've never met them before, and have an instant bond. And that's that human connection. And we spoke with some neuroscientists about this. And what we learned from the neuroscientists is that our brains are hardwired for this kind of being a part of a tribe. We're hardwired because it's a survival technique. We're the most comfortable when we're part of our group, because, you know, going back tens of thousands of years, our ancient forefathers and foremothers were more safe and comfortable when they were within their own tribe. And if they ventured out and they were with other people who were outside of their tribe, that was potentially dangerous. So I think that that there's been some people who have figured out the importance of this. You know, certain politicians in America have figured this out. And I think, and we've just spent 5 years researching it and writing a book about it called Fanocracy, that brands can use these ideas too. The ideas of understanding how tribes work, understanding how people become fans, and then doing things that will allow them to develop fandom in their own brands or for themselves.
So I want to deep dive into the book, but before we do, I mean, you wrote it with your daughter.
Yeah.
You know, it's challenging for me to help my son with his homework. Talk to me about that. How did that go down? I know she's older now, so.
Well, she's 26 years old now, and she was 21 years old when we first decided we were going to go down this path and write this book. So what happened was I was starting to really get into the idea 5 years ago that I want to dig deep into fandom because I'm so interested in, you know, what I'm a fan of. Not only am I a fan of live music, I'm also a fan of the Apollo Lunar Program. I'm a huge fan of surfing. So I wanted to understand what that was, and I wanted to test a thesis that any organization can build fans. And so I kept bugging Reiko, my daughter. I kept bugging her, and I'd say, well, what would a woman feel about this? What does a millennial feel about this? Tell me about your Harry Potter thing. You know, my daughter was born in Tokyo. My wife is Japanese, so she's mixed race. And, you know, tell me about the whole diversity thing. How does this, you know, and and then finally she says, you know, I'm going to have to help you to get this right because I don't want you to screw it up. And she said that when I went to Comic-Con. My daughter loves Comic-Con. She goes to Comic-Con every year and gets dressed up. And so I went to Comic-Con and I interviewed some of the people at Comic-Con. And then I came back and I wrote like a 2 or 3 page riff that I intended to put into this book. And she read it and she goes, Dad, this is terrible. You know, you have not captured this at all. And it was like a light bulb. I said, would you like to write this with me? Shall we write this together? And she immediately agreed. So that's when we started embarking down the path. And you know, when we started, we were not equal. I was the dad. I was paying her college tuition. You know, she was living in my house when she wasn't in the dorm. And now 5 years later, she's married. She's about to graduate from medical school, and we're equals. And we did the project as equals. So it was a really transformational experience for us to write this thing together. And the fact that it's a middle-aged white man who loves the Grateful Dead combined with a millennial mixed race woman who has a neuroscience degree finishing up her medical school degree and who loves Harry Potter means it's a fabulous mix of perspectives that I think is way, way, way better than I could have ever done by myself.
Just for a moment, I mean, any parenting tips? Any parenting tips from the experience of having done this now?
The main thing that we both learned is that we had to trust one another impeccably. I mean, I had to trust that she would tell me when I was doing something dumb or not writing well. And I had to accept when she would edit me and say, you know, this stinks. I don't want to use this in our book. And so I had to learn that, yeah, that's great. Thank you for telling me that. And so I think the biggest parenting tip I can think of is that at some point your child becomes an adult. I don't know what age that is. Is it 16 or 18 or 20 or 25 or whatever it is? I don't know. At some age, your child becomes an adult, and the more you can treat them as an equal. I mean, you always be their parent, but the more you can treat them as an equal, I think the faster you can develop a really remarkable bond that's different than the sort of parent-child thing as you're growing up. And for us, it was that book that was the catalyst for that.
The book is Fanocracy. It is available online. It just came out like last week.
Yeah.
And it's a terrific read.
Thank you.
Tell me, let's get into it. What is a fanocracy?
So it's when fans rule. And it's an organization who puts the needs and wishes of their customers ahead of everything else.
Now, I know in the book you talk quite a bit about, dealing with pushback from people who say, well, I can't build a Fanocracy. Yeah. I'm an insurance company, or I can't build a Fanocracy. I'm an automotive dealer. I'm a dentist. Right. And you had some great examples of how just those types of companies had built Fanocracies.
We went into this with the thesis that anybody can do it, and we came out of it absolutely 100% convinced that there's no question any organization can do this. I'd like to share two examples that are among my favorites to illustrate this. One of them's in the book, the other one's not, but one of them is a U.S. government agency that has 50 million fans. This U.S. government agency, you can be walking down the street in any city in the world, and you can see somebody wearing a T-shirt of this U.S. government agency. I was in the Seychelles Islands in November of 2019. It's a group of islands off the eastern coast of Africa, just above Madagascar and the Indian Ocean. I was on holiday with my wife. We were walking on a remote island down a rural street, and there was a young man who was approaching us wearing a NASA T-shirt. And the idea that NASA, a government agency, has 50 million Instagram followers and people eager to wear their logo all over the world is absolutely evidence of a fanocracy. And it's a remarkable one. And it's a U.S. government agency. I mean, it's crazy. The second example actually is in our book, and it's one of my favorite examples that's in the book, and it's Hagerty Insurance. They do classic car auto insurance. And I spoke with McKeel Hagerty, who's the entrepreneurial CEO and founder of Hagerty Insurance. And he said to me, David, I can't market and do public relations in the way everybody else does. I don't want to be the low-cost provider. I don't want to spend more money than the other guys on TV ads. I don't want to compete with the geckos of the world. I don't want to go out and use public relations to say we're the best at claims and try to get media to cover that. I needed to do something different. And so what he said to me was, we specifically went out to see if we can develop fans. And he absolutely has. They go to hundreds of classic car events around North America every year. And they're on site. They're meeting fans of classic cars. They're giving educational seminars. They have valuation reports where they track the value based on auction statistics of different classic cars. And you can see history going back many years of how much your car is worth. And they do predictions of how much it's going to be worth in the future. And they also have a bunch of inside data because people insure their cars for its market value, so they know how much these cars are worth. They have a YouTube channel with 1 million followers. They have a drivers club with 650,000 members where members can engage and connect with one another. So it's a fabulous example of a fanocracy. And McKeel Hagerty said, David, we absolutely have built a massive fan base, and that's our word of mouth growth engine. And they are the largest classic car auto insurance company in the world. They'll grow by 200,000 new members this year. And they've had double-digit compound growth every single year. I actually am a customer of Hagerty. I own a 1973 Land Rover Series 3, and I've been insuring it for 15 years. And yesterday, I received this from Hagerty, and it says, let's celebrate a milestone, 15 years together. Thanks for driving with us, your friends at Hagerty. They sent me an anniversary card from when I became a member of Hagerty. So I'm a fan of my insurance company. I mean, who would have thought that, right? An insurance company. So yeah, so we're convinced any organization can build fans.
It's a great case study. It was also my favorite case study in the book. But, a company like Hagerty, they've already got operating capital. They're in business. They've got some profits they can defer into building a Fanocracy. The signal to noise ratio is so high now that we've all sort of become disciplined about how we manage our attention. And the result is it's tougher to get people's attention. I mean, if you're a marketer. So if you're a startup or an unknown brand or a service provider, when you're establishing your brand, is it better to get known for what it is you do? Or can you go ahead and, build, can you be a new dentist with no clients and just post pictures of yourself skateboarding?
A very good question. So I think that organizations that focus only on their products and services, it's much more difficult to get out there and be able to make a difference. I think that organizations that try to develop a human connection and understand customers, it's easier to break through because it's actually pretty rare for organizations to do that. As much as we think, organizations are like Hagerty, most of them aren't. Most of them are like, here's our insurance, we're cheaper, or we advertise more, or whatever it is. So I do think, though, that if there's somebody who's a new dentist, that they have an opportunity to stand out in some way. And I love Dr. John Marashi. He's the dentist that we identified, who is a skateboarder, and he wears bow ties, and he has an Instagram with something like 13,000 followers on it. I mean, he's doing a fabulous job with standing out and injecting passion into who he is, so that people can see there's and he is in the Los Angeles area. Yeah, there's 20, I don't know how many there are. Let me just guess. 20,000 dentists in the Southern California area, and all of them have a website essentially built by the same with the same template approach. All of them use the before and after dirty, crooked teeth and straight, clean teeth. And then he's the one who is on a skateboard. He's the one who skateboards from examination room to examination room and shows photographs of him doing that. He's got skateboards up on the wall, so that when somebody says, hey, I'm thinking about changing my dentist, or, hey, I'm new to the area, do you have a suggestion for a dentist? Like, yeah, my guy's really great. He loves to skateboard. And he wears these crazy bow ties. And it's just a way of standing out because we're very much engaged with people who are passionate about something. We're drawn to them. We don't have to share that passion. You don't have to be a skateboarder, but you remember that this guy is really into skateboarding. He's not just somebody who wears a white coat and has diplomas hanging on the wall. And I think that the same thing is possible with any organization. If they're new, if they're established, that if you can show humanity and you can show passion and you can engage with existing and potential customers on a human-to-human basis, that it goes a long way.
I think about the Hagerty case study, and how nicely what they did aligns with their product that they sell.
Yes.
I guess you could make the argument that a lot of kids on skateboards break their teeth and need to go to a dentist. But I mean, to what extent does the Fanocracy you build have to dovetail with the service that you provide?
Great question. So it's better if it can dovetail in some way, but it can be simply the showcasing of passion, which is what Dr. John Marashi did. An example that I really love in a commodity business is the Duracell batteries example that we put in the book. And the idea here, we actually have 10 different prescriptions for how you can develop a fanocracy, and showcasing your passions is one of them. That's what where Dr. John Marashi comes in, and so the idea of giving more than you have to is something that can help you to build fans. And I'll tell the story of Duracell in just a moment, but the way that I came up with this idea is that the Grateful Dead famously allowed their fans to record their concerts. They gave away their music in a sense. You could bring in professional level recording gear into the shows. Every other band on the ticket, it said no recording allowed. The Grateful Dead said, sure, why not? And you could record the shows, and they would give you seats right behind the mixing board. And initially, in the early days, people recorded on cassette tapes and traded those tapes around. And then later on, it was MP3 files. And the only rule was you can't sell them as long as you give them away or trade them. You're totally cool. And that created an incredible social network of people who traded those tapes before Mark Zuckerberg was even born. So the Grateful Dead gave more than they have to, the ability for people to record those shows. What Duracell does is they do batteries, but they have a program called Power Forward, where you can, victims of natural disasters, earthquakes, fires, floods, tornadoes, when the power goes out, that's when batteries are most in demand. The power goes out, we need batteries, and we need our flashlights, our radios to be powered up. And they have a fleet of trucks that goes into disaster areas to provide free batteries, absolutely free batteries to people in need. And what's remarkable about this program, I spoke with Ramon Valentini, who is the vice president of marketing at Duracell and runs the program, is that it's a huge, huge public relations effort, because those literally millions of people who get free batteries are so appreciative of it. And he said that there's sometimes internal debates because they realize that they could sell batteries for more than the normal price because they're in such high demand then. But they recognize that when they give those batteries away, when people need them, that they remember it for the rest of their lives. And they will frequently then become a fan of Duracell and will continue to buy Duracell and will talk about Duracell. And there's millions of people who share on the social networks like Facebook about Duracell. So this idea of growing fans can come from a number of different directions and using different techniques. But ultimately, it's that, very strong personal connection and doing something for people to bring them together.
I do a lot of work with startups, and I've been thinking a lot about the different needs companies have at different growth stages of their development. And the stages I've been thinking about are the startup phase, the change-up phase, which is usually some sort of pivot to find a product market fit, the scale-up phase, which is about growth, and the grown-up phase, once you become an enterprise. So thinking about that hierarchy as a marketing strategy, how would leveraging Fanocracy differ for companies at different growth stages?
Wow, that's an interesting question that I have not given any thought to. But I think that, I've also involved a lot in startups. I think why don't we focus a little bit on startups and then see where that discussion takes us. But what I see, because I advise startups myself, and I've worked in startups as well. What I see so often with startups is a maniacal focus on their product and service that they put out there. And that kind of makes sense that, an entrepreneurial founder is like, I created something really interesting. If it's, for example, if it's software, I created a really interesting piece of software. Here's what it does. And then they hire a few salespeople, and maybe they hire a marketing person or a communications person, a social media person. Everyone's talking about the product. And I think that there's room in the startup phase to focus much more on that human connection. And specifically, I mentioned that we spoke with some neuroscientists about the idea of how we humans love to be a part of a tribe of like-minded people. So can you, as a startup entrepreneur, figure out where is that tribe of like-minded people, and then literally become a part of that tribe? And so one neuroscientist and we spoke with these neuroscientists who helped us learn about these ideas. One of them, he's since passed away, but his ideas are fascinating. His name is Edward T. Hall. He identified different levels of proximity. So further than about 20 feet is called public space. And our brains don't track people in public space. But inside of about 20 feet, into about 4 feet, which is called social space, or inside of 4 feet, which is called personal space, our brains track people who are in that space because we want to know, are they part of our tribe? Are they friends, or are they potential enemies? Are we going to feel uncomfortable if we're near them and have to potentially fight people? That's what our ancient brain is telling us. So the more a startup can bring people physically close together, the more they can create that emotional bond between people. The closer you get to someone, the more powerful the shared emotions are. And so, like having a client conference, even if you're a tiny company that's just getting started, incredibly powerful. I mean, I've been on the HubSpot advisory board since the very beginning. A company that's I would suggest is probably still scaling up, but is certainly reaching that fourth phase you mentioned. When I joined them, they had no customers and 8 employees. They have $650 million in revenue now. And they did their customer conference really, really early. And there was only 400 people in the first one. There was 26,000 people in the one in 2019. Bring people close together. But people say to me, David, we don't have the sort of business that we can bring people physically together. So we identified another form of neuroscience that I think is fascinating, called mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are the part of our brains that fire when we see or hear somebody doing something as if we're doing it ourselves, which I'll demonstrate with a lemon and a slice of lemon. So if I take a bite of the lemon, this is why I was a little bit. This is why I was a little bit late coming to the this conversation, Eric. But wow, it's powerful, right? My eyes close instinctively and begin to water a little bit. My mouth puckers up, and my saliva glands are doing their thing, and it's a really powerful thing to bite into a lemon, isn't it? And I'm tasting it. My brain is firing, but your brain is probably firing too, just by seeing and hearing me talk about biting into a lemon. And that's the power of mirror neurons. So here's where this comes in for startups. Our brains, when we see people on video, like we are right now, for those people who are watching this on video, or with photographs, our brains tell us through the power of mirror neurons that we're actually in close physical proximity with the person on the other side of the camera. Our intellectual brain knows it's a video. I'm not next to that person. They're thousands of miles away. But our mirror neurons kick in, our ancient brain kicks in and says, yes, we're right next to that person. And so a video cropped in this way, or photographs cropped in this way, as if you're 4 feet away, cocktail party distance, is a really, really powerful way for, well, for all organizations, but particularly startup companies. And I always recommend to companies, especially startup companies, do not use stock photos. Use photos of real people, and use those photos of real people cropped as if you're at cocktail party distance 4 feet away. Look directly at the camera, have people smiling, and the potential customers' brains will tell them that this is a person I can trust. This is a person who I can be a part of their tribe. There are so few companies that do this, though, that have videos that are done in this way. So I think it's fabulously powerful because it's rooted in neuroscience.
In his book, Blitzscaling, about growing startups into massively valuable companies, LinkedIn founder and venture capitalist Reid Hoffman includes the 9 counterintuitive rules of blitzscaling, or growing. And number 9 is ignore your customer.
Wow.
He writes, quote, "The fundamental rule of customer service has long been the customer is always right. But for many blitzscaling companies, the key rule is provide whatever customer service you can as long as it doesn't slow you down, and that may mean no service." He goes on to say that ignoring your customers is never going to be positive, but it may be one of the fires that's easier to let burn while you're fighting bigger, deadlier fires. And so I wonder if this might suggest anything about the right time to build a Fanocracy and the wrong time based on a company's growth stage.
That's an interesting question. And, the difference in what I was just talking about compared to what Reid was talking about, I think is pretty significant. What I was talking about is reaching your customers and potential customers as people, hosting an event physically, or using videos and photographs to trigger mirror neurons as if they're connected, is a one-to-many approach. And so you're not reaching each individual customer necessarily with this strategy, but it still is in my mind, it still is a very, very customer-centric focus. Instead of saying, our products are the best, check out our products, we're the flexible, scalable solution for improving business process, and then using stock photos and all of the things that so many startups do, it's figuring out who is the tribe of people I want to reach, who are the fans I want to reach, and then creating something that they can become a fan of. So I don't know that my strategy that we're just talking about and Reid's strategy are mutually exclusive, because reaching one individual customer at a time, I think I haven't read Blitzscaling, but as I understood that chapter 9, as you just talked about it, relates to one individual customer at a time.
Yeah.
And the idea of we talked about Haggerty Insurance. What they're doing is they're reaching millions of people at a time, and HubSpot is reaching millions of people at a time. And I think that you can still have an extremely human approach, even when you reach millions of people at a time.
It's funny how, much of this just comes down to simple economics. And he writes in the book, a startup is like jumping off a cliff and then trying to assemble an airplane before you hit the ground.
Nice.
And so, he talks about sort of prioritizing. Can you really afford to do, customer service for isolated issues? I recently happened onto kind of a cool email marketing tool called Lemlist.
Never heard of it.
Lemlist. Yep. And it's a French company with a really cool founder who makes these excellent videos suggesting different strategies for email marketing. And I invested a lot of time in the platform. Ultimately, the platform was just not ready.
Yep.
And they couldn't help me. They weren't able to support me. And I felt terrible because I felt like, hey, I'm giving you voice of customer here.
Yep.
You should really come up to speed. And they kind of looked at me. I mean, they didn't say this, but the takeaway was, you know what, we've got other fires to put out.
Yeah.
We understand. And so what the result for me was, okay, well, I wasted, 3 weeks of my life figuring out how to,
Trying to do it. Yeah.
get this thing going. And that's obviously the value of a forester or a gardener or some of these tech firms that help you handicap and analyze which ones to run with.
I do think that focus, and when you're a startup, focus is really, really, really important. Because do you want to focus on a particular vertical market? Do you want to focus on a particular job function? Do you want to focus on a particular particular country? Do you want to focus on big companies versus small companies? I mean, just all these different ways that you can focus. And there's always going to be someone who's going to come and dangle a lot of money in front of you to do something one-off or to get you to go beyond what your focus is. And I think that especially as a startup, you have to stick to the guns of this is where we're going to go. And maybe you need to pivot, but when you pivot, you're pivoting in a really big way rather than just grabbing at these things that come along, because that's a really hard slog.
As well as I do, based on your experience with HubSpot, that these VC-funded companies are really swinging for the fences. Their investors want huge returns, huge multiples. They're looking for unicorn status, and they're really looking for a winner-take-all market or a winner-take-most market. And in those environments, it's not uncommon to put growth before efficiency, despite uncertainty.
Yes.
You look at like how Uber comes into a market, they'll deficit finance their entree into the market.
Yeah.
And then once they've wiped everyone out, they'll raise the prices. So are network effect companies in winner-take-all markets in a unique position to build Fanocracies?
Interesting. I don't know the answer to that through any research we did, but it would seem to me that they would be. They would be, and that if they focus on developing fans, if they focus on developing a fanocracy, they have something more than just winning from the best product perspective. And we've all seen markets where there's a company that everyone thinks is the winner, and then something happens and there's an upstart, and that winner is no longer the winner, and then many times they go out of business or are acquired. If you have fans as opposed to simply having customers, they might be willing to stick with you as you pivot. They might be willing to stick with you as you change and adapt. But if you're selling something merely as a commodity, it's harder to have your customers come with you on a journey if you need to make a change or you need to make a pivot. I think if you look at Microsoft, for example, and they're an example that we talked about in the book. They were an enormous, big, powerful company for several decades. And then they had a few lost years. And now they're back with a vengeance. And so, if they maintain a base of fans, they can go through what Seth Godin calls a dip and still emerge on the other side even stronger because those fans are willing to stick with them.
Talk to us about creating an intimate, cozy atmosphere on a global scale, because there are brands doing it, right?
Yeah, there are. We've talked about it already, and I may be sounding like a broken record here, but the more you can humanize your organization, the more you can show that humanity, I think the better. People don't want the cookie cutter sort of approach. They want to have something they feel they can be a part owner of, in a sense that they, this is my company. This is the company I do business with. This is the company that I'm a fan of. The one that came to mind as you were talking is an example we found that was a little bit surprising. It's called Me Undies. They're an underwear company. They do subscription underwear. And I'm not sure if I would call them a global company, but they're a big company now. They're a startup. They've gone, and they're now, I guess I would still call them a scale up. But their tagline, which I absolutely love, is 10 million butts and going strong. And they're every couple of months they change the number because they're growing so quickly. So what they do is they do subscription underwear, men's and women's, and they even have his and her matching pairs. So you can be with your significant other or groups of friends, and you can all be wearing the same pattern. And they have special patterns that only people who are members and who are part of the subscription have. And there's hundreds of thousands of their fans who post pictures of themselves in their underwear. And their Instagram has hundreds of thousands of subscribers. Their Facebook has, I think, 500,000 fans. And so they've taken a product category that's kind of boring, especially for men, and turned it into I'm a fan. Turned it into a product category that has lots and lots and lots of fans. And I think they've done it by showing humanity and showing real people and creating an atmosphere that you feel like you're part of a tribe, creating an atmosphere that you and your friends can be wearing the same underwear, and you can take pictures of yourself and post it, and MeUndies may use it in one of their videos or on their Instagram. And I think that, any other an underwear company, but I think it's possible to do that in any kind of organization. We started our conversation, 45 minutes ago around this idea of the cold and polarizing digital world. I think the digital world also offers humanity, and it offers the ability to reach people on a personal level. And a company like MeUndies, a company like HubSpot, a company like Haggerty, very different categories, all going through the scale-up phase. What was your third phase again, Eric?
So the first phase is startup.
Yeah, startup, scale up, and
change up.
Oh, change up.
Scale up.
Yeah.
Grown up.
Yeah. So these companies are all, I would argue, they're all still in scale up mode. I don't know. Would HubSpot be a scale up or a grow up?
Well, that's a very interesting question. They're really an anomaly. They're sort of the last man standing that hasn't been acquired.
Yeah.
And as, companies offer these vertically integrated stacks that include not just CRM now, but ERP, inventory, bill of materials, HR, accounting, all wrapped up into one tool that also does marketing and sales and customer service. They're sort of in a unique position because they become a CRM, but they don't have an ERP side of the house.
Right.
So I'd call them a scale up.
Okay. So, all of these companies have developed what I call a fanocracy. They've all developed a human connection. They've all been able in their markets to become organizations that the customers love them. They can't wait to do business with them. They'll if they have a minor screw up, they're still with them. They've built so much goodwill, and I am convinced that any organization can do that. And in the book Fanocracy, as you know, we have many more examples than we've been able to share today, but other ways, other prescriptions for how people can build this.
The book is Fanocracy. Fans stick around through a pivot. Customers split. I love that.
Nice. I didn't say it quite that way. You're way more articulate than me. I love the way you said that.
I wouldn't say that. But thank you so much for doing this. In our events that are coming up, we've got the Global Artificial Intelligence Conference. That's going to be January 21st, 22nd, 23rd in Santa Clarita. The other two events we have on our list for the week are the TechCon SoCal Conference, which is going to be leading tech and innovation companies pitching their wares to VCs. And last but not least, Ann Wiley, who is just a terrific teacher, is doing a road show with a course called Get Clicked, Liked, and Shared, Content Writing for PR. And she's going to be hitting a number of different cities but she's going to be in Durham, North Carolina, February 5th and 6th. If you want to get on the list for the events, hop on over to ericschwartzman.com/blog and sign up for PR Tech Secrets, and you'll get that. And then join us next week. We're going to have Johnny Bentwood. He's the global head of analytics at Golan, and he's going to talk about tracking the customer journey with external data. So you don't need to have access to someone's internal data to actually be able to build their customer journey and see where the drop-off is. So that'll be next week on PR Tech Wednesdays. We hope to see you there. And David, thanks so much for joining us.
Of course, that next week sounds great. Thanks for having me on, Eric. It was a really fun conversation.
Take care.